Well, James Creedon is here with us now. It's time for Media Watch. Good to see you, James. And we're going to go back to a story we've been covering tonight. Sarko leaks, it's being called today. Now, this is the former French President, Nicolas Sarkozy. One of his aides was secretly recording him. Now, not just for one conversation, but hundreds of hours of conversations. He's taken them to the press. What are some of the juicy bits?
I mean, I think the funniest part of all this is he said, I wasn't allowed to take notes, so these were just for my personal notes. You know, I was using a dictaphone because I wasn't allowed to write down notes in these private meetings. Anyway, the guy in question...
I'm sure you'd be allowed to secretly record all of it.
That's much more legitimate, isn't it? Now, in any case, just a quick background note on who this guy is. He's described on our own website in an article going back to 2012 as the French Karl Rove. You can see it here, a political combat for the French Karl Rove, formerly of the far right. He was brought in by Sarkozy as an advisor. He was the architect of the 2012 political campaign, which really swung to the far right. It was an attempt to steal votes, if you like, from the far right National Front Party. So very heavy on themes like immigration and security. A lot of controversial statements by Nicolas Sarkozy, for example, about the Roma community. He was accused of taking the UMP party down a road that it had never gone down before, the Republican right wing in France, really going on about issues that were very controversial and seen as far-right themes. In any case, he recorded hundreds of hours, it appears, of private discussions at the presidential palace and elsewhere, with extremely embarrassing statements in those tapes that have now been leaked to the press. For example, Nicolas Sarkozy described as a kept man by Carla Bruni. There were even... Carla Bruni even crept into these tapes.
Yes, Carla Bruni's on there a lot. I'll get to that in a sec. But also he referred to him as the dwarf.
That's right.
Advisor.
That's right.
This is the president of France.
He called the first 2 years of his term or of his mandate 2 years of errors and idiocy. Wow. You hear him also being very flattering of the French president when he's practicing a speech that Mr. Buisson had helped to pen. So on the one hand, he's flattering Nicolas Sarkozy, and then behind his back, he's calling him, a dwarf who had 2 years of errors and idiocy. You hear Carla Bruni mocking the former French president for his €330,000 salary, which for her
because she's an ex-supermodel, isn't she? And she's
a millionaire.
Yes, of course. And
That's right.
She's an heiress as well, isn't she? She said she would quite like to get back into modelling because it pays a lot better, but she was heard saying it's not the done thing when you're the president's wife.
That's right. So it's really on so many levels, on a personal level, but also on statements that he also was critical of François Fillon, his prime minister, who he kind of said, we all know what François is like. Just all sorts of statements that indicated a dismissive view of ministers, of his prime minister, but also it's on so many levels.
The only one that came off okay was Alain Juppé, the foreign minister. He said he's probably the only one I'd make prime minister. The rest of them are
That's right.
not that good,
so
really.
I think, there's the actual content of these tapes, deeply embarrassing. But there's also the fact that he placed so much trust in this formerly far-right advisor for his 2012 campaign. You have tweets such as this one saying, from a centrist politician saying, Nicolas Sarkozy, don't forget, when you dine with the devil... That's Patrick Buisson. You need to use a very long spoon. I'm not sure if that's some sort of strange...
I think that's a French metaphor.
A French metaphor,
It's gone over our heads, James.
A little bit over our heads, but I think the point being you dined with the devil,
you lie
Mr.
down
Sarkozy.
with dogs and get up with fleas.
That's much more
probably
appropriate.
Our equivalent, isn't
much
it?
better. Much better. But it's deeply embarrassing. And
the question is, what does this mean for what we've been talking about for a long time, a possible political comeback for Sarkozy in 2016?
Well,
I mean,
it's very embarrassing for him.
A lot of these ministers, of course, are still working and are still
It's embarrassing
in
for him
opposition.
because of what he said or what his advisors were saying about people he might have to work with again. But it's also very embarrassing for his judgment to say that he placed so much trust in this man, bearing in mind that he ran his 2007 campaign on a kind of a centre-right platform. He played up the fact that his father is Hungarian. So it was almost like a French version of the American dream. You can be, descended from immigrants and you can make it. And then in his 2012 campaign, inspired by Buisson, kick the immigrants out. So what does that say about his consistency and his credibility? The fact that he placed so much trust in this man. So on many, many levels, Laura, both in the content of those tapes and in what it says about how much trust he placed in this man, it's very embarrassing.
And what about any possible legal action? We've heard nothing from Sarkozy. We just hear that he might be furious. But I mean, is he going to go after either Buisson himself or perhaps the publications? It's Le Canard Enchaîné and Atlantico?
That's right. He could, but that would perhaps only keep the story in the papers for longer. So I think it would be a bad idea.
You don't think he would do that? All right.
We'll see. He might do it, but I think he might not want it to be talked about much more than
and we can expect more and more of these reports to come out, I imagine. This is just the beginning.
Well, hundreds of hours of recordings. And
it's like it is like WikiLeaks.
That's right. And Henri Guénaud, a former advisor at the Élysée Palace, described it or compared it as a rape, actually. He's in terms of the degree of, what would you say, abuse of trust.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to another leak. This is a phone conversation between the EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton and Estonia's foreign minister. Now, they're talking about, I think this is a very sensitive time to be having these conversations anyway. Right. They're talking about the new government in Kiev, the government that Russia has just refused to meet with here in Paris. What was the substance of that conversation?
Well, it's extraordinary. This is the second time in about a month that you've had a leaked tape of a very private conversation at a very high level. If we go onto the computer, first of all, this is an article talking about Victoria Nuland, the State Department official.
Yes, remember her delicately chosen words.
That's right. She said F the EU, and then she went on to have a discussion with the US ambassador to Ukraine about various officials and politicians who could be placed in a new interim government. It made the US look very interventionist, right? It was very unflattering. Now, the next tape is a discussion between Catherine Ashton and the Estonian foreign minister, who's just back from Kiev, and he's very critical of the new interim government, the opposition, as it was being termed when Yanukovych was still in power. Let's take a listen to an extract of the tape where basically the woman being referred to as Olga is, in fact, one of the main doctors who was working at Maidan. Now, she seems to suggest that it wasn't Yanukovych people who were supporting the snipers, but in fact the opposition themselves. Let's take a listen to this extract.
The same Olga told that, well, all the evidence shows that people who were killed by snipers from both sides, among policemen and people from the streets, that they were the same snipers killing people from both sides.
Well,
And it's really disturbing that now the new coalition, that they don't want to investigate what exactly happened, so that there is now stronger and stronger understanding that behind snipers it was not Yanukovych, but it was somebody from the new coalition.
Right, now,
wow, pretty explosive stuff.
It's a very explosive stuff. The Estonian Foreign Ministry has confirmed that the tape is authentic.
Right.
Now, Catherine Ashton didn't confirm the information that the Estonian Foreign Minister was citing. He was citing this doctor who was very much on the forefront of what was happening. Look, what it shows is that there is a communications war going on online. You have these leaked tapes. Apparently that was Ukrainian, the security service of Ukraine, loyal to Yanukovych. They are the people who put that tape online. The Russian Secret Service is accused of having put the Victoria Nuland tape online. What we're seeing is a propaganda war via YouTube. Exactly. Yeah. And of course, just very quickly to show you on the computer, there is, of course, an awful lot of finger pointing regarding Russian media and an awful lot of inaccuracies in their reporting. So it goes both ways. There's a lot of material on Russian media which is simply untruthful. For example, that image there is supposedly showing Ukrainians fleeing into Russia, but they're actually fleeing into Poland, not fleeing at all. That's the Polish border. Inaccuracies in the Russian media too.
All right, so you've got to keep a close eye on that. All right, James, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Laura.
James Creedon there. And of course, we will be keeping a close eye on what's going on with regard to the situation in Ukraine. Our correspondents are on the ground in Crimea, where they witnessed for themselves Russian troops overrunning an anti-missile defence base in Crimea today. We'll be hearing from our correspondents. We'll also have all the latest on the diplomatic wranglings going on here in Paris. The Russians have left, the Americans and the Europeans are still here. Stay with us. More coming up next.